This is disc number 10, July 30th, 2015. And boy, am I nervous right now. But let me say this, that in contemplating over all that's happened and what is yet to happen, and having lived all of that, what is yet to happen, I boil down to one word, and that word is power. And power is that what causes motion. It's the ability to act. It's the force or strength within us to work. Now, Emerson made this statement about power. He says, "Do the work, and ye shall have the power." So the question becomes, what comes first? Now you have the matrix of do the work, and the next matrix is that ye shall have the power. A lot of people wait around until they have the feeling and whatever it takes to move forward. But that's the opposite of what Emerson taught. He maintained that you do the power, that is, you do the work, and in so doing the work, then you obtain the power. And I know from experience, he's absolutely right. Now, here I am. We've gone through 10 discs, and I knew that I needed a mentor. And a mentor is an instructor. That's what a mentor means, an instructor that you trust and have faith in, and you look up to, and they care about you, and they're competent and capable of giving you the kind of information or the help, assistance, inspiration, whatever, that you need to move forward. Now, in that context, I want to tell you a story. And the story is about Ernest L. Wilkinson, who was the president of BYU for 20 years. And he started in 1951, That was my senior year in high school. And he completed in 1951 to 1971. Okay, that's the time frame. He had a problem. And he needed a solution to that problem. And that would take a person to come forth and help him. So Ernest Wilkinson, operating out of Provo, Utah, living in a house on the campus of BYU, wherein he took a salary of $1 per year during those 20 years. So he got a $20 bill. He drove to Salt Lake City and met with the president of Zions Bank in the main office and his right-hand man, who was a man by the name of T. Bowering Woodbury. He outlined his problem to them and said, I got to have someone who can get this done. It's going to take 1 week. Who do you recommend? And they both spoke up, as I've heard the story told to me by them, and said there's only one guy that we would trust. It's Doug Snarr. He said, all right, I'll go with that. They phoned me. I remember getting the phone call. Can you come, drop whatever you're doing, and come right now to the bank? I said, well, now what have I done wrong? And they said, don't worry about that. This could be positive or negative. He says it's going to be positive. So then I felt, what a relief. So I went to the bank. Well, I was introduced to Ernest Wilkinson. And he told me it's going to take a week. You'll get on an airplane on a Sunday afternoon following your church meetings. You'll fly to, and I can't disclose here where to. I don't think it's proper. It was held in confidence to one of the major cities in the United States. You'll be there Monday through Friday. You get back on the airplane on Saturday morning, then you come home. Will you do it? Now, this was not going to be an easy task. And this happened just before the bank called me and just before all the bad information had hit the newspapers that billboards were to come down. So I was kind of feeling good and in a positive mood. In fact, I was at the pinnacle of my, let's say, best feelings, of the vicissitudes of my life, as at the pinnacle. So they said, here's the tickets, and here are the reservations for the hotel. And I did it. It wasn't easy. But I had to represent, not me, but Mr. Wilkinson. So I had to sell these people on doing something for him. And that was the trick of the trade. But when Saturday came, got on the airplane, I flew back. I went and met with Ernest Wilkinson, and I said to him this: I have successfully carried the message to Garcia, which is the title of a book by Elbert Hubbard. Now, he knew what that meant exactly, that I did the job. So I felt pretty good about that. Now, the question becomes that I did the work and the power came to me in this instance. I needed a mentor, and now it started to create a mentor in Wilkinson. So it just so happened that he'd come to Salt Lake City, give me a call, you have lunch with me at the Elder Club. And yes, and we would talk. And this happened several times. And I felt very, very good about this. I mean, it was kind of, let's say, made my, it built my ego, let's say this, and my own self-image within myself. Later on, I'm going to kind of stick with Wilkinson for a little bit. I noticed how he dressed. And he was in dire need of help. Here he had the students, and then he had himself looking like he was 150 years old in the clothing that he was wearing. Now, it fit him, that's one thing, but it didn't have the image that I felt he should have. So what I did was, I went and bought 5 ties. These ties were bright. And I called him. I said, I want to show you something that I think you're going to really like. Come on down, come on down. So I drove down, walked into his office, and I said, President, these ties you're wearing, you got to admit, they're horrible. And he just leaned back in his chair. He's not used to that. And so then I laid out the first tie. Oh boy, that is really something. And the second one, and the third one, and the fourth one, and the fifth one. 5 ties. He said, how much do I owe you? I says, nothing. This is from me to you. I'm thrilled to be able to give you these ties. You need these ties in the worst way. So this happened, I think, twice on the ties. And then I said to him, now, President Wilkinson, I think that all your life you've had a problem of being able to buy a suit. Because in the first place, you're short, you're very thin, it's hard to be able to find a suit that would fit you wherever you went. And he said, oh, it's been the nemesis of my life, being able to buy a suit. If I get one that works, I just wear it till it wears right out. I said, well, I've got the guy that what we'll do is that he will come because he has at his command a tailor. And that tailor will take and make that suit out of the material that you choose. Now, I would recommend right now to kind of bring you into vogue, you go into a pinpoint. And so he said, all right. I said, and I got to warn you, this guy swears, this guy smells tobacco, this guy is the opposite of probably anybody you met is you have no idea who I've met. I have met so many different kinds of people. Now, Wilkinson maintained a law firm in Washington, D.C., called Wilkinson, Craigum, and Barker. And this was just down about 3 houses from the White House, and or I should say 3 doors down. But and he'd been there all those years. Wilkinson had become probably the number one man in the United States, as an attorney, that is, who had various Indian tribes that came to him for advice, pursuant to legislation and so on and so on. And out of that, he was able to, over a 17-year period, to get a bill through Congress, and which benefited the Indians immensely. And out of that, this is where he got his wealth, was from that, because he took a percentage of the action. And it was a 17-year feat. And so he understood all of the ins and outs and how the problems of Washington, D.C., how they mislead, they lie to you, on and on we go, the threats and everything that is connected to Washington, D.C. And I believe that from that we were eventually able to kind of build a relationship, because when I got involved, why, he started to empathize with me. Now, back to the suit. So I said, now, when do you want to meet this guy? He'll come to your office. He's going to measure you up, and you can order a suit right through him. Trust me, it's going to be fantastic for you. He says, I want to see him immediately. He gave me the phone number. I want to immediately have him call my secretary, and I'll tell her that he has first rights to me. How long is it going to take? I said, well, I know that you're a man of time, and I would say about as long as you want it to take, but to get the job done, I'd give him an hour. Okay, he's got an hour. And if he needs more, I'll give it to him. So now, the man's name was Ken Strong. He was a cussing, non-Mormon, but knew more about suits than anybody I've ever met or talked to in my life. And he lived here in Salt Lake City, and all he did was go around to key people, measure them up, and order the suits. They were all British wool, and they were all put together in Hong Kong. So that's the theory right there. So as he tells me, that is, Ken Strong says, I said, I got in there, and he was so nice to me. I measured him up, not easy. And I told him that you told me to tell him he's to have a suit with a vest with a lapel on the vest. So he'd have 2 lapels, the suit and the vest. 2 lapels. He said, okay, that's what I'm going to do, whatever. So he got him all measured up. They picked out a material. Wilkinson said to him, I want to order 5 suits. And the guy says, no. I'll only have 1 done for you. What do you mean you only have 1 done for me? I want 5 suits. Well, you're not going to get the 5 suits from me. You're going to get 1. And we'll see how it looks on you and see how you feel. And then if you like them, I'll get you 2 or 3 more. We'll build up to the 5 that way. Wilkinson was satisfied. Well, it's these kind of little experiences that came down the road between Wilkinson and myself. Now, I have right here a piece of paper to tell you who he really is. This piece of paper is Remembering Ernie. This is what he says about his testimony. I want to bear my testimony that if you develop the habit of work, it will be the most invigorating, satisfying, relaxing, and the greatest blessing of your life. The opportunity to work is God's greatest gift to man. And this means 6 days a week. You will never be successful here or in any profession or business on a 40-hour a week. Now, this is from Ernest Wilkinson's assembly speech in 1966. There's some more things I would like to read. I just couldn't remember the exact words, and I don't want to try. I want to be as he spoke them. While many people think that I have boundless energy, the fact is that I often get very tired. I have learned that the mind is superior to matter, and that if I will just put my mind to it, I can generally overcome my physical fatigue. If I sometimes offend people, it is not because I want to, but because I am determined to get something done. Paul Harvey, whom I've introduced to you before on disc number 4, and I think in disc 5 also, made this statement about Ernest Wilkinson. We have a president I like to characterize as an academic George E. Patton, unafraid to tell it like it is. Now, the Blackfoot Indians gave Wilkinson an honorary designation because they were always late for these meetings. And he had tons of meetings with these Indian tribes that were late. And Wilkinson couldn't hardly tolerate that, but he had to, he had no choice. But he made his feelings known to them. And so the Blackfoot Indians, and I assume that's that tribe up there in Idaho, near Blackfoot, Idaho, or in that vicinity, but I don't know for sure. They gave him the designation of Chief Frantic Bear. Chief Frantic Bear. I'd like to have a name like that if I know the truth, but I'm not worthy of anything like that. Now, this is just a little bit of facts on his 20 years. The academic buildings on the campus, when he started in 1951, there were only 6 buildings on the upper campus. When he left 20 years later, there were 254 permanent buildings and 85 temporary buildings from 6. Now, there was, in addition to the 6, there was that one building, nice size building, on the lower campus. Now, I took my watercoloring classes in that lower campus building my freshman and sophomore year. Now, student housing grew from accommodations of 1,300, that's rooms for these people to, students be able to rent, like little apartments, to 6,000. 1,300 to 6,000. Now, the enrollment increased 6 times in size. When he came, there were 4,004 students at BYU. But when he left, 20 years later, there was 25,116 students. That's unbelievable. Now, the faculty members grew from 244 to 932. And those faculty members with doctoral degrees increased from 50 to more than 500. Now, the budget funds for the university had been increased 7-fold. Now, I don't know about what that figure was. I don't think any of us will ever know those figures. But I know that I've talked to one source that's extremely, extremely knowledgeable several years ago. At one point, 1/3 of all tithing funds went to BYU. Now, he had the ability to not only obtain that money from the tithing funds with the approval of all the brethren, but they had the faith in him that he knew how to spend that money to maximize it so that nothing would be wasted. This man was remarkable. This was one of a kind. So he maintained that if we educate these kids that come, they go to all parts of the world or all parts of the country, they grow up, they become future stake presidents, bishops, and whatever. And so that they have to have that talent because we have an unpaid clergy. We don't hire people to do those things. We have to do them ourselves. The original 5 colleges with 37 departments had been expanded to 13 colleges and 71 departments. In 1951, the campus had one branch. In 1971, they had 98 wards and 10 stakes. So I think with that, I'll just set this aside, and that kind of gives you all an understanding of why I wanted to somehow ingratiate myself in with Mr. And President Ernest Wilkinson, but he called me first. I didn't call him. I took advantage, or I should say I maximized that opportunity and hung with it. Now I can say this much about him. Later on in my life, and it was right towards the end of his life, I had taken the time to write my memoirs. I never published them, but I gave those memoirs to three people. The first one was to Ernest L. Wilkinson. The second one was to Ezra Taft Benson, and the third one was to Neil Maxwell, Elder Maxwell. Wilkinson called me the day after I gave my memoirs to him. He said, I want to meet you tomorrow at the Elder Club for lunch. So I was there. He says, I read that entire work of yours in one sitting. Read right clear through the night till I had read every single word. And I read it because it was so gripping. I couldn't set it down. Now, my story is being written by 2 professors at BYU. I know that when it's completed, no one's going to ever read it. Not even my own children's going to read it. But that thing of yours, I couldn't set it down. What have I got to do in money or whatever you want to have you write my life story? Because I know that I don't have a lot of time. Now, this was a hard thing for me to do, to say, President Wilkinson, I can't write that story. Because nobody can. Only you can. You picture in your mind that you're talking to 12, 13, 14-year-old children, and you reduce it down to that level. And all you do is tell stories. One story after another story. Just keep telling stories. Everybody likes a story. They want to know how it's going to end. That's all you got to do. He said, but I don't know whether I could do that. I don't see myself being able to do that. I said, well, just think about it. Just picture how you would want to hear it if they were you and you were them. What you would want to hear from your own life story. How you would want it said to you, and you picture yourself as 13 or 14 years of age, at the most 14. And then start writing on that level. I know you're an attorney and you use these big, long words, but you've got to get it simple. Simple, simple. Well, he kept calling me. And a week before he died, he called again. I've often thought about that. But my self-image was not of such that I could do that. And to be honest with you, when I went to BYU, everyone had to take an English class. English, 101 or whatever it was called. Well, they had a class for those kids that weren't smart enough to take 101. And that's where I ended up. It's in that class. And I think I came out with a C at best. And now here, the president of that university, who was the president when I arrived in Provo, asked me in his most later years, would you please write my story for me? I don't know how to answer that, really. Here I am now. I've got a contract. It's been 18 months since the time that my bank called my note due and payable of upwards to $1 million because their attorneys had told them that because of the new Highway Beautification Act, the asset side of my balance sheet was no longer reliable because the bill would destroy my assets. And therefore, under just the rules of banking, they called that note due and payable in 30 days. In today's money, that would be at least $10 million. I couldn't go borrow it from anybody. I couldn't. I was just, what do I do? I couldn't. I said, well, they're going to have to pay for these signs. And he said, the government is the world's worst credit risk. No, you're never going to collect a penny from that government. Tell me the value of the State Street Motel sign on State Street in Boise, Idaho. And you've heard the story before. I couldn't tell him the value. Well, in this 18 months, because of some miracles which I've already gone through and explained, I now could tell the value of that sign and not be too far from it. In fact, I had all my signs in Utah appraised. In fact, I not only had those signs appraised, but under pressure I brought to bear against the state government, that's the governor under his jurisdiction, under the highway department, and plus the Attorney General's office, had all agreed that I was right. And from that, without going into any detail, because I've already done that, I have gotten a contract that when my signs in Utah only, and I had more signs in Idaho than I had in Utah. In Utah only, a contract for $1.1 million. I had that. I had the senator from the state of Utah, Ted Moss, behind me. I got all that support in that 18 months. It was a miracle. Totally a set of different miracles, which I've already explained. Now that contract could not have been achieved, but it took one man that made the difference. Now he wasn't the key man. The key man was Jack Francis. I've already explained him to you. But the other one was Bob Wright. And Bob Wright was a Republican lawyer, but he was quite a vicious attorney, litigator is what he was. That was his work. Now he, after they agreed to appraise my signs and everything, Got that all put together on the basis that they would enter into a contract. When it came down to entering into the contract, opposition, always opposition. And that opposition was the road commission. It took me to get a hold of the governor, phoned him and told him, sign that contract. It took Ted Moss, the senator, to call him, sign that contract. But then it had Bob Wright, my attorney. So the very day of the meeting, it's going on, and I'd kind of done all I could do. There's sometimes you have to have someone carry your water for you. And Bob Wright stepped in there, and he is tough. He got the deal done. He's about 2 years older than me, died about 10 years ago of Alzheimer's, but he saved my neck. So I wanted to bear thanks to Bob Wright. Well, but the big sell was I had a bank. I got a Utah bank to pay off the Idaho bank. We didn't have to deal with them any longer. Got the Utah bank. And to give me enough usage in my accounts receivable coming in to help me finance my lobbying effort in Washington, D.C. Now, I learned one rule from this. I cannot emphasize this rule enough. If you learn anything today, it's this rule. Governments will not act to solve problems. Never, never, never. They only act to relieve pressure. If you cannot bring the pressure to bear, you're going to get nowhere. And that's reality. Now, the contract I had that the state will buy my signs was predicated upon the funding of the federal government. And I've already gone through how impossible that would be. Impossible. And the opposition was horrendous. So the contract, as wonderful as it was, when it is all boiled down, is basically worthless, unless I can get the funding from the federal government. What chance have I got? One little tiny kid from Utah going back there. Give me a break. Well, I'm reminded of a story I experienced when I was a missionary in Ireland. I noticed a certain few people. It'd rain, and then while it's still in these cobblestones, there's still moisture and the cobblestones are shining a little bit. There are certain people, just a few of them, just dregs they were. They'd be looking down. They just look down. They're just going like this. They're just looking down at the cobblestones. And I remember, what are they looking at? And I watched them. All of a sudden, they'd stop. They'd reach down, and they'd pick up the remains of a cigarette. And then they'd take, and that little tiny bit, the last parcels of tobacco, they'd smoke it. And then they'd go and start looking for another one. And I called them butt pickers. Because they found the butts of cigarettes. Well, I called them, look at these butt pickers out there. So I thought, well, I'm going to see if I can find a cigarette butt, just out of curiosity. And I looked, and I looked, and I looked. I couldn't do it. I never found one. But the butt pickers, they could. Because this became their art. They had the ability to focus with such intensity on finding those butts, cigarette butts, that they could locate them. And they would get great pleasure when they found one. And they did that, seemed like they were doing it all day long. And this was in Belfast, North Ireland, where I experienced this. And there's something during this period of trying to just get organized, because I knew that I had to go to Washington, D.C. I'd organized 13 sign companies, and I was their spokesman, all from Salt Lake City area and around about. They gave me the power to represent them so that I was not just me only, but it was us, because you have to have support and help. Well, that's not a lot of people when you think about it, but nevertheless, it was a start. And I felt that trying to gather up within myself that final amount of effort, that degree of power that I felt I didn't have. So there was just a little period there, I'd say maybe like 90 days, 60, 90 days, where I was kind of spinning my wheels, knowing what I had to do, but not knowing how to go about it. That was my problem. In that context, rule number 2, and this came to my mind strongly, that power must be seized by a leader at some point. Now, there's 2 ways you get power. One is that you indeed assume the power. That's what I'm talking about right here. You assume the power, or you have it bestowed upon you. 2 ways. And I've been in enough meetings to know that because someone has the title doesn't mean they have the power. Usually in the meeting, it's the one that has the strongest will, has the power. Even on the same side, when they're all the same side. Because others will kind of look to the one that has the power. What does he say? I came to the conclusion you don't have to be a senator, you don't have to be a governor, you don't have to be a congressman, you don't have to be all of these, you don't have to be. You just seize it. You seize it first with the greatest amount of energy. Now, right now, we're seeing a little bit of that in our current election, with just barely getting started with one man, Donald Trump. He's seizing the power. Now, so I said to myself this: I am going to be the most influential and powerful figure in the country on highway beautification. No one is going to be more powerful, more knowledgeable, and more involved and active than me. I'm going to assume that power. Easier said than done. But it was during this time of going through all of this that I thought of my mission in Ireland, and I thought of that very wistful, melodic, and amazing piece of music called Danny Boy. Now, the lyrics of Danny Boy, written by an Englishman and not an Irishman. He was an attorney. He was a song machine. He literally wrote over 10,000 songs, and upwards to 1,000 were published. Now, the melody of that song, that's something different, and that's Londonderry Air. And that story, that is that a little itinerant piper was going through up in Londonderry area, and he played this music. And he was blind, but he used to take money from people. But I don't know how he got around, but he did. There was a lady named Jane Ross, Miss Jane Ross. She heard this piper. So she ran and asked him where did he get the music. He says, well, I just heard it. I just heard it. I hear it all over the place. I just hear it. So she was very gifted in music, so she wrote down the melody. And that was finally published in 1855. Well, Danny Boy So here it's written by an Englishman. It's from music from Ireland. That's true. But when he wrote that music, or I should say the lyrics, he sent it to his sister in New York, 1910. Well, she says, sends it back to him. It says, take it and put it to the music of Londonderry Air. So he did that. Now, make a long story short, it didn't go anywhere. Well, fortunately for the world, Glenn Miller recorded Danny Boy on the underside of a record. Now, that which meant that it was not going to be as important as what's on the top side. What happened was that Bing Crosby heard that song and he had it recorded and he sang it, and it became a colossal hit, not just in the United States, but basically throughout the whole Anglo-Saxon world, but centered in Ireland. Oh, Danny Boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the roses are falling. It's you must go, and I must bide. But come ye back when summer's in the meadow, or when the valley's hushed and white with snow, and I'll be there in sunshine or in shadow. Oh, Danny Boy, I love you so. But when ye come, and all the flowers are dying, if I am dead, as dead I well may be, you'll come and find the place where I am lying, and kneel and say an Ave there for me. And I shall hear the soft you tread above me, and all my grave will warmer, sweeter be, for you shall bend and tell me that you love me, and I shall sleep in peace until you come to me. And so here we have this song taking place, which would be just brought peace to my soul, because the reason that the story of the butt pickers was so essential to me was because they had obtained the art of focusing. They could see. So what I had to do was to gain the art of focusing on getting the money so we could implement this contract that I had, pay off the bank, clear my name, and I started to reach the point where I was believing that, they might have a point, the environmentalists. They might have a point, but they've gone too far. They don't want to pay for the signs. So I'm going to see what I can do to intervene there. And so basically, that's what we're really talking about. So I organized my company, and in that process, to prepare myself to go to Washington. The first step was this. I went back to the bank, to Jim Hill. There were Reed Wood was who I saw first, then Jim Hill second, then Arch, and I saw a third, the president of the bank. I said, Jim, here's how I look at it. I went back earlier and I testified in a congressional hearing. Here's what I saw. I saw gray personalities wearing gray suits, boring-looking ties, and long faces. And I got to bring something into that sets me apart from everybody. Now, there's thousands of people back there. I'm just one person. So I can't look like them. I won't stand out. I've got to give myself some uniqueness, some individuality. So, and I believe in color. So what I want to do is borrow $12,000 more to buy me a wardrobe. Doug, how are you going to pay that $12,000? Well, you know what my deal is with the bank. This will be a side loan with the bank, but I want you to advance me that $12,000 because I know what I'm going to do with it. I'm going to take and I'm going to get the most colorful, unique suits of anyone in Washington, D.C. They're going to look good because they're going to all have a vest. I'm going to get summer suits and I'm going to get winter suits because it gets very cold there and very hot there, but it's humid there. So I have to do it just right. And I said, I'm going to wear cowboy boots because I don't want to be like them. Now, in those days, no one wore cowboy boots back there. Now there's a few that do, especially from Texas and places like that. Well, he said, Doug, you're just kidding me. Again, how are you going to pay for it? I said, well, you know how I'm going to pay for it, Jim. After I get the big loan paid off, I'll pay for this little one. And he says, well, I'm going to advance you the $12,000 that might cost me my job, but I'm going to do it anyway. Well, I want to read to you a little excerpt. This happens to be from the Minneapolis Tribune. Tons of articles I've got. Now, the reason they wrote on this is that the home of Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, 3M, is in Minneapolis. And they own the biggest sign company in America called National Advertising. And they made Scotchlight, which would reflect lights in the evening or at night. And so they had millions and millions tied up in these signs. They hated me, but they were starting to get worried. At first, they didn't take much seriousness to me. But so I'm reading to you what's happened after I bought the suit and after I went back. Now, the heading is, United States takes aim at billboards. Next. But 3M fights to save highway signs declared illegal in 1965. Now, this was written 5 years later. Now, here's what they say in this article. It's on here, and it's the whole thing on the back. Douglas Snarr, 35-year-old self-proclaimed billboard king of Utah, came to Washington, complete with suits of green, purple, and orange, and ties, iguana cowboy boots, and personality to match. So that was just, there's a ton of those like that. So to tell you the truth, it's the smartest tactical move I could have made. Well, when I arrived in Washington, not easy. I remember I had 2 suitcases. And I asked the cab if he'd drive around and see if we could see some for rent signs. Now, I remember that I wasn't smart enough at first to get the cab. I was walking at first. And finally, I gave up and got a cab because my arms had given out on me and legs. But I remember I was just crying. I couldn't stop it. It was so big, and I was so little, and there was so much involved, and I had no comprehension of what lay ahead. And I come to realize that it was my advantage, because if I knew, I wouldn't have gone in the first place. I'm convinced of that. So what we had, that I found an apartment, a little for rent sign, on 16th Street. 16th Street runs right straight into the White House. Right, you can step in the middle of 16th Street and you can see the White House. I was about 5 blocks back. Scott's Circle. Now, Scott's Circle is where there's 6 different roads come in to Scott's Circle. Kind of like a roundabout in the day's terminology. I was on the 9th floor, and I rented it for 90 days. I kept it for 10 years. So that kind of gives you an idea of what I was up against. Now, the apartment, I was so amazed, I call it plastic. Plastic pictures, plastic cups, plastic plates, plastic everything. Then the sofa would extend out and make a bed with plastic covering over that. Everything was plastic, and which is cold. So in order to eat right, what I did was I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy cereal, just buy cereal. So I got about every different kinds of cereal I could get, and I lined it clear across, and like this, up and back, and where I could see it. I didn't put it on the shelf. I put it down on the cupboard, so that I could look and see exactly what I had. Use the refrigerator for milk. So all I needed was one bowl and a spoon. I was in business. That's how I operated when it came to food. And if I didn't want to have this cereal, I could have to go get me a White Castle hamburger. Have you ever had a White Castle hamburger? Well, you know, they're little tiny square things, but I liked them. Well, I go up to Capitol Hill, and I go into Senator Moss's office, and everyone was nice and friendly. And he says, what I'm going to do, Doug, is arrange a meeting for you in my office with Frank Turner. This is the best I can do for you. I can't take you any higher than that. Now, he is the chief of the Bureau of Public Roads. He's been employed for 42 years. He was the man that Dwight D. Eisenhower picked to take and implement his dream of the freeway system in the United States. Turner knew where every skeleton was, but by anyone. Knew all the problems, he knew everything. He had power, but he had leverage. Leverage. We talked about this last time. It's given me a lever long enough and I can move the world. And he had the lever. Well, so the meeting was held. And he came with about 6 guys in the Moss's office. And there was Moss and myself and these 6 guys. There were 8 of us in this meeting. He spoke very monotone like that. Hardly raise or lower his voice at all. He looked straight at you. He has a very unassuming manner. He was all ears. Like says the poem, give every man thine ear, but few thy voice. That was Frank Turner. That's that line from Shakespeare. Give every man thine ear, but few thy voice. So I was. I gave my pitch. We showed him the contract. Gave him the background of how this came about. All the steps. They never bat an eye. Then he said this, well, there's nothing that we can do about this because there is no funding. And Moss went, I'll introduce a bill. Why don't we set up some pilot projects? I'll introduce a bill that only for just $5 million only. And we can experiment with this idea of Doug's in Utah. He said that'd be fine. Good idea. So this was Senate Bill SB 1422 or 1442. Yeah, 1442. In the hopper it goes. They know it'll never even see the light of day. They're smart. They've put up with so many things. No one's going to take them off their course. But they're going to remain in complete control all the way, and they're not going to give it up to a state of Utah, particularly to a little entrepreneur named Doug Snarr. They're not going to even play around with him. So what happened was, this went on for quite a while. Nothing. And I was just going up there every day and just seeing this, trying to see these various senators, and it was difficult and just couldn't get any traction. It was very, very difficult. I mean, it was just like hitting my head against a brick wall. But I had that little bill now. This little bill's in the hopper, so there's been some progress made, but not much to speak of. And then an article appeared. This was good fortune. I call this fate. This article appeared in Fortune magazine. It was titled, "We Can Afford a Better America." Now, written by Edmund K. Faltermeyer. He was the number 2 editor of Fortune magazine. Now that was, particularly in those days, extremely prestigious magazine. If it's what he writes, people are going to read. Now, in this article was a little thin paragraph, and he said, we should remove the signs pursuant to the highway beautification program, and we should do it by buying sign company by sign company. Now, that connected, because I had also told everyone that when it comes time to remove the signs, they got to do it by sign company by sign company. Otherwise, for example, take the state of Utah. There are 7,000 signs in Utah. Now, this 7,000 signs, they're owned by 27 companies. Now, which is bigger than my little caucus of 13. But anyway, so the idea is, why take and appraise and then condemn sign by sign 7,000 signs individually and separately? Just take a company by company and then appraise their signs and buy them all, and they take them all down at once. So that saves a lot of money. But the government's not interested in that, really. They're interested in power and control and to keep everybody paid who are in the bureau that they work in, called bureaucrats. But I had to talk to him. So I said to myself, if I called him on the phone it'll never get through. If I try and get an appointment with Edmund K. Faltermeyer, it'll never happen. So here's what I'm going to do. Is I'm going to fly to New York. And then I'll call him from the airport. I'll get in a payphone, make a call. So I'll do this unannounced. I'll just do it with my fingers crossed. So I flew to New York City. I phoned, finally ran down. That was quite a process. I didn't have his number by any way, chance. But I just started with, I got to talk to Fortune magazine. That's how I got to it. I got his secretary finally on the phone. I said, I have flown from Salt Lake City, Utah, at 2,500 miles roughly, and I need to speak to Mr. Faltermeyer, pursuant to his article, We Can Afford a Better America. Can you do that? And she says, no, I can't. I'm sorry. He is on vacation. He will not be back for 2 weeks. I said, well, can't you get him on the phone wherever he might be? I assume a man in his position is not going to be too far away from a telephone. And she says, well, let me call you back. Where are you? I said, I'm in a phone booth in the Kennedy Airport. She says, I'll call you back. So I said, well, I'll stay right here and man this phone. So call me right back. She shortly did and said, well, he is home. He is painting his house. He has a house in Brooklyn. It's what's called the brownstone homes. These are very beautiful old homes. And he's in the process of restoring his right in Brooklyn. Very famous location. So I begged her. I said, listen, if you could just give me his phone number and let me talk to him, I'll be satisfied no matter what he says. But I just cannot take no for an answer. I just cannot leave and go back having not seen him. It's 2,500 miles. I've come to talk to him. I got to see him. And I begged her. I literally begged. And she gave me the number. I phoned. He answered. He said, Mr. Snarr, I told my secretary I'm in work clothes. I'm not able to see you. I am painting the inside of my house. I don't want to turn you down because I'm very flattered that you've come all this way because of my article. Now I went into it and says, I'm the reason that I'm here is because what you wrote. I'm the only guy in the country that's trying to implement what you said in your article, and that is to remove signs, sign company by sign company. I've got a contract with the state of Utah that says they'll buy all my signs in Utah, company by company, but buy my signs first. And so here is the first implementation of your great idea. So I gave him all the credit possible, but I got to talk to you. We got to work together. I got to talk to you. I said, now, about this painting. I said, I grew up with a paintbrush in my hand. I mean, I painted signs. I got signs in 13 states, started off painting signs. I know how to handle a brush. I know how to clean a brush. I know how to take care of a brush. Trust me, you're going to want to talk to me. Once I get there, just let me come to your house. And I just begged him, and he said, okay, you come. So he gave me the address. So I get in a cab, and we're going now to Brooklyn to meet with Edmund K. Faldermeyer. We got there. He's a really nice-looking guy, a little bit taller than I am, and very, very affable, very friendly. I mean, I was really impressed by this guy. Very smooth. Oh, my gosh, he's smooth. And so in I go. So I said, now tell me, what are you painting? He said, well, right now I'm on this particular door. And I'm trying to, get this door. You got all this molding around the door, and I'm trying to paint this molding. And I said, now show me how you hold the brush. And so he got the brush, and of course it was all wrong. And I said, well, let me just show you. Here's the way you do this. So then I got like this. I got it in my brush, and I said, now you watch this. I'm going to do this for you. I'll cut this whole line for you. And I went this way. See, he was going this way. That's wrong. It's this way you got to go, like that way. So the brush is this thick or wide, and like that. You go like that. You don't go like that. That's an amateur. You go like that. And I took that thing, and I cut that whole line from the top to the bottom. He just sitting there amazed. I said, now here's how you fill in. And so then I showed him exactly how you'd fill in. You don't just go like that. You got to know what you're doing. And so I showed him, and he just became so fascinated by this. And so after we had finished painting the molding around this one door, which I did the whole thing, this molding for him, now he's willing to talk. So then we sat down. He became a friend. And I learned that networking, you can't get very far without it. I learned the marvel of quid pro quo. You scratch my back, and I'll scratch yours. That's what it amounts to. he just says, I want to know your story. Tell me all about you. And he just relaxed, and I went through it. I mean, we're talking about a fair that went on for 3 hours in his home. And he really had an understanding, but he could answer the questions. And he said, tell me, what is your goal? I said, my goal is to be paid for what my signs are worth, and I can take that money and pay back the bank, whom I owe the money to, and maintain the honor of my name. That's my goal, number one, right there. He says, I admire that. So you've gone through all these loops and hoops to be able to make it good with your bank. Is that right? I said, precisely right. I care about the environment, but I'm not going to tell you that I love the environment more than I do my billboards. I'm not going to tell you that at all. But with my approach, I win, and the environmentalists win too. He said, well, I've always been against paying for the signs. I said, you don't want that. That's thievery. That's not the American way. We want to have a better America, not just how it looks, but in the process of obtaining it so it looks properly. We don't want to hurt anybody in the process. And furthermore, the law the Constitution guarantees just compensation. He agreed. He said, well, you have convinced me that signs must be paid for. Now, what about in the cities? I maintain, I said, that if a city, and it is up to the city fathers, if they deem it's best in their interest to leave signs, may say this, if you can build a hot dog stand, then there ought to be a spot there for a sign if they want it. But that's not my decision or your decision. That's the city fathers, and that'll vary from city to city. But when it gets beyond the city, then that's something different. But I think they should come down sign by sign. He says, you know what I think we should call this? The Snarr plan for billboard blight. That's what you're doing, the Snarr plan for billboard blight. So he gave me a moniker. I had a name. He said, that's what we're going to do. He said, well, you know what? I think that we ought to talk about having a little article in Fortune magazine on you. He said, when will you be back in town? I said, well, I can't come back until after your vacation. So he said, I appreciate that. So it was arranged, and I came, spent another afternoon with him, and an article was written and appeared in Fortune magazine. Now that gave me stature. That gave me standing. That gave me where someone better take notice a little bit, because now he has on his side Fortune magazine, which with that also means Time magazine. They're all of the same ilk or ownership. So that's what that means. So the ball game all of a sudden changed. I wasn't just a guy in a purple suit that day, or in an orange one, or a Kelly green one. I was someone with a certain degree of influence. Now, out of that came other people wanting to talk to me. I learned this, that in talking to these people, that I called it Washington, D.C.'s. They have their own language. So us greenhorns come in, and they're speaking in a different code than we are. It took about 2 years for me to figure this out. So yes means no. So they can take and say yes in a very, very polite way, and they've just shafted you. You go away feeling kind of warm and fuzzy, but they've got you right where they want you. Just let you just wait and wait and lose patience and lose patience. Eat up money, eat up capital until it drains you, and finally you're left empty, literally empty, and you go back with the tail between your legs. That's the technique. So anyway, it took me about 2 years to break that code. But then I got a call from Frank Turner's right-hand man, who was in the original meeting with Moss, wanting to know, very slurpy and warm and friendly, congratulatory of, oh, you've got this article in Fortune, you've got this bill, SB 1442, you've really accomplished a lot. Wait, I'd like to talk to you. So it just so happened, this was purely coincidental. My wife happened to have been with me at the time. So I said, this is great. When can we do it? He said, let's do it tonight. So Carol agreed because she's going to be going back to Salt Lake City. So we went out with him. He said, this is probably the nicest Chinese restaurant in Washington, D.C. He told me a story about Frank Turner, how much power he had, influence he had, how strong he was, how many people have attacked him during these 42 years of building that freeway, people wanting it to go this way rather than to go that way, all the problems that he had. But no one got the best of him. He always won. And he then, his bottom line was, go home before you're ruined. Because you're not going to get this highway beautification bill on a pilot project basis ever passed through the Congress of the United States. And if you get through the authorization committee, which could be done, you'll never get through the appropriations committee because we'll see to it. You don't have a chance. And I don't know, but I rose up against him. I thanked him for his integrity to tell me what he honestly thinks. But I said, it's Frank Turner against me. But in this case, he's good at building highways. I know something about the billboard, highway beautification, he doesn't have a clue on. I'm his man. But I will never go back. I'll be ruined first. But I don't believe you can ruin me, because I will not allow myself to be ruined. I'm sorry. I appreciate your integrity. Then he broke down and says, Doug, I want you to know how impressed I am with your character and what you are. I didn't feel right about taking you out tonight, but it was my job. Frank Turner asked me to take you out and to so convince you that you're going to go home and leave him alone. You're a little gnat to him, just flying around, just bothering him. But he said, Doug, you can count on me when you need certain information of what's going on. I can tell you that in confidence. You've made me feel better about myself by how you have stood up to me and Frank Turner. So, I'm going to be a double agent. But I'm on your side. Now, Carol was with me. That was an astounding achievement, to go right into the center of power, the real center of power, and to get a key man who will give me information and stand up for me. I never dreamed that could ever happen. So now I got Moss, and now I got Frank Turner through his assistant, number one assistant, that I can count on. And I'll count on them until they betray me. But once a betrayal takes place, it's over with. Then I know where I stand. So the question is, I can only use him in the context of truth. It's got to be right. It's got to be consistent, and I got to have enough power with me, enough influence with me. They'll take notice. What happened was, what's the big paper in Washington, D.C.? That's the Washington Post. Everyone on Capitol Hill, everyone involved with the government on any level, they read the Washington Post every single day. That meant I had to read that paper, whether I agreed or not. That's not the issue. I know what's going on. Whether it's pursuant to highway beautification, doesn't make any difference. I've got to be able to talk a little bit. But I also realized I had to read another paper. I never liked either paper, by the way, because of my politics was different. But that's not the issue. I'm trying to get a bill through Congress. I'm trying to, make it work. I'm trying to win. And that was the New York Times. Very different from each other, but yet not so much. In terms of, if you compare the editorial pages, they're pretty much the same. Now, the other news, that would vary a lot. New York's for New Yorkers, and the Washington Post is for those people in Virginia and thereabouts, Maryland, and etc. Now, so I get a call from a Coleman McCarthy, who is an editorial writer for the Washington Post. And he wanted to know if I would have lunch with him. And then he said, no, let's make it a dinner so I can spend more time with you. I want to know about you. Now, I noticed when he talked to me, he stuttered on the phone. He stuttered. Now, I was very curious. Now, my problem was I don't want to stutter back because he might feel like I'm mocking him. Well, I was able to solve that problem all right, but I had to be careful. So I can't remember, I think it was Paul Young's, the actual restaurant name. I think it was Paul Young's, which at the time was the number one restaurant in Washington, D.C. It's not now by any means. It's long gone, actually. So we sit down to talk, one-on-one. He was a speechwriter for JFK. He only writes articles on the editorial page of the Washington Post. His office is right next to Ben Bradley's. Ben Bradley is the editor of the Washington Post. Ben Bradley runs the Washington Post. Ben Bradley is the Washington Post. His office is right adjacent to Ben Bradley's in a very large building. So we talked. We talked about stuttering. And we talked about a lot of things. And I told him I believe that people can overcome stuttering. His theory was, if I stutter, I stutter. If I don't stutter, I don't stutter. But I'm going to talk, regardless. And if I hit a word where I stutter, I stutter. But I'm not going to let that impediment defeat me, because I'm going to still keep talking no matter what. Because I'm noted for my words, my written words. That's my power. And that's my base, is the written words. We had a long talk. You know, I found a brother that night. A real brother who was different. He was genuine. And there was just something about him. I think it all goes back to stuttering. There was a humility in him that was different. I felt absolutely in the company of a person who was trustworthy. And again, I've said this before, quoting Samuel Johnson. There are no friendships without confidence. And there is no confidence without integrity. He had the integrity. And he knew that I did. And we trusted each other. So at the end of the day, he said, I want to write a major editorial on you and this program. You have sold me that they have to pay for those signs. You have sold me on every aspect of that highway beautification program. You are on the right side on every aspect of it. You're the man. I believe, just like you self-proclaim, and I did, that I know more about highway beautification than any man in the United States. And I know how it's to be implemented to the best of all concerned. Save money for the government and make it efficient for the sign companies' owners to take their signs down and not be destroyed by the process. All aspects we talked about in depth. Well, now he's invited me to come to his office at the Washington Post. This kid from Idaho Falls, Idaho. So I go there. And I can see myself right now sitting right down next to him on it, right adjacent to his desk. There's he's right there, and I'm right here, and the desk's right there between us. But I'm not on the opposite side. I'm just on the corner, and he's on the corner. So we're just right there together. So I says, now I'm going to start to write. I'm going to type this. This will be the article. We'll do it right now, word for word. If anything you don't agree with, I want to know immediately. Or anything you want to comment on, I want to know immediately when I'm writing a particular line or a particular train of thought. I want to know immediately exactly what you think. So we sat there. Boom, boom, boom. We were there. I mean, for a half a day. And he had that letter, or that article, that editorial, I should say, written. And then he said this, Doug, I'm going to call John A. Volpe, who was the head of the Department of Transportation, the number one man. Now, that's the first time I mentioned that name to you. But in the meantime, the Democrats have gone out, Nixon has come in, and therefore there's a new cabinet. So now there's a new cabinet officer, and that was John A. Volpe. Who was John A. Volpe? He was born in Italy, came to America at 9 years of age. He was a hod carrier, carrying, with a wheelbarrow cement. He built a colossal company. He's from Massachusetts. He got the contract to build in Washington, D.C., the Department of Transportation's building. Huge, big building. He built it with his company. The governor of Massachusetts, Republican governor, 3 straight terms. That's John A. Volpe. Now, I haven't told you yet how I met him, but he knew of me. I hadn't met him yet, but he knew of me. He knew a lot about me. It had come to him. So McCarthy calls. Gets Volpe on the phone. Mr. Volpe, I am writing an article on highway beautification. It's going to appear in the editorial page over the weekend. And I have interviewed at great length, spent a lot of time with a Mr. Douglas Snarr from the state of Utah. I would like to read this article to you and get your opinion on the validity of the words that I have written. And John A. Volpe said, Mr. Coleman McCarthy, you don't have to read that article to me. If Doug Snarr told you that this was the case, then you know it is the case. He is absolutely honorable and honest. Therefore, you can trust him entirely. So to save you time, I can tell you right now, publish it, and I will support it 100%. So he put that phone back down, he looked at me. He says, gosh, Mr. Snarr, can you ever expect a more flattering approval of your work and what you are as a person and what you're attempting to do than what I've just heard on this phone? It's amazing. He says, I have up here a book, Bartlett's Book of Quotations, about that thick. It is the book. Winston Churchill maintained that he was educated by Bartlett's Book of Quotations. Churchill said that once because he got a quotation on everything. So he said, pull that down. He said, I want to give you this book out of respect for you as a person. Whew. I was just like this. I just couldn't quite fathom that I said, am I right? You're right next to Ben Bradley? He says, let me see if he's in. I'll take you in and introduce you to him. He happened to be out right then. He says, I'm saddened by that. I'd love to. It's been an honor for me to introduce you to Ben Bradley. He's top water. And I said, well, his reputation is that. What I lacked was the know-how in the context of the administrative sequence to get things through Congress and to deal with these various dangling participles and then these obstacles and how you can shift. You got to understand this, that the legislative process is like a pyramid. Now, when you start at the bottom, it's a broad base. So you got quite a bit of options. As you start to go through the process and go higher, higher up, options become fewer and fewer and fewer. Until finally, what you are trying to achieve through legislation is on the president's desk. He's at the top. So if he says yes, signed, it's law. If he says no, you got to have very, very tough sledding. Chances are it'll never go any further. 2/3 of both the House and the Senate. So that's what you got to deal with. Well, what I lacked was that knowledge. That knowledge. I think I had the instincts of kind of where to go here and where to go there. And I had the ability to express myself once I got through the doors. And I felt like I kept telling myself, Doug, you can get through any door. Doug, you can get through any door. The biggest problem anyone has back there really is getting the interview. And that's where the corruption comes in. Most corruption comes about is in getting the interview. then they charge you money. Now, sometimes they keep it in their own pocket, and sometimes it goes into a campaign. You'll never know that story. But that usually comes with a price tag, is the interview. Unless you have enough clout on your side, which the key always is the proper introduction. Always that. And so you need someone, like an MC, that can introduce and say things about you in just a few seconds that makes the difference in the entire meeting. It's the art of the interview requires the art of getting through the portal door. That's it, the portal, to get through. Well, it came to me after deep prayer. And I remembered meeting a missionary when I was in the mission field. And I have a picture of him just down the hall. We always called him K. Let's put it like that. It's always K. Now, this is a guy that was just an attorney, brilliant, works for J.C. Penney's, advises them on all legal matters, retail matters, pursuant to what's happening in Congress, period. He would handle the legal side of that. So I took and invited him, called him to lunch. And we met. I told him what I'd done. Well, he was, to be honest with you, he was flabbergasted that I got as far as I was able to get with these contacts. I mean, Fortune magazine, Washington Post, all of this had articles to show him. Now, he was aware a little bit about this because he had seen this. So therefore, those articles became my introduction. We never worked together in the mission field, but we met in Scotland. The purpose of the meeting was that the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, for the first time, was coming outside the United States to Europe, and they were holding a big event in Glasgow, Scotland. And they didn't think they could sell enough tickets. They brought all the missionaries into Glasgow, and therefore little tiny posters were dashed off, or flyers, if you want to call it that, and we divided up all of that Glasgow, Scotland. That's a big city, by the way, huge city, the biggest in Scotland. And so each missionary would take an area and pass these out. Well, it was a sellout. I mean, every seat was gone. Worked out well. And that's where I met him, was doing that. When I went back to Ireland, that's where I was working. But he remained in Scotland because that's where he was working. They came from England all over. It was really quite an affair. Now, so I talked to him. He says, well, I can't help you legally, in a way, because my contract with J.C. Penney's requires that I give full time to them and that I do not make money on the side. But I can't resist doing some work for you because I have enough slippage in time that I could help you a little bit here. Now, we became friends. This man, and coupled with Senator Ted Moss, became the two most important people of my life during those Washington, D.C. days. I could not have won without either one of them, and I could not have won without both of them. So I had to have them on my side. But McKay is the person that, or I should say Kay, the person that, he has a son named McKay. And that's how I get mixed up. He loved to pontificate because he was so good at it. He was so smart. To me, it was just like going to school. I would just keep asking him questions and questions and questions about all kinds of things, aspect of Washington, D.C., and how it worked, and so on and so on. And he would just, we'd talk. We'd often have lunches together. Now, what I had done earlier was that there was a restaurant called Trader Vic's in the Statler Hilton Hotel. on 16th Street, by the way. So I went in. There was always a line, always a line. You go to lunch, there's always a line, standing there waiting. So I went up to the maitre d', and I said, I want to tell you something. When I walk through this door, and there's a long line, I want you to say, Mr. Snarr, I've got the table for you. I want you to say, Mr. Snarr. You call my name out every time. Mr. Snarr, Mr. Snarr. Call my name out, right? Right. Now, I gave him $200. That's $2,000 today. So this was a serious thing, commitment on my part. Because when I come to lunch, Mr. Snarr, and that guy never failed me, never failed me. So Kay was quite amazed that first time I took him there. Mr. Snarr, come right here, sit down. I never did tell him what the story was, but anyway, this takes a little common sense, in this world. But I think with that, I'll say that I'll close and looking forward to tomorrow, the tomorrow of tomorrows when we meet again. Thank you.